Thank you for joining us in a conversation on this book, The Cross-Shattered Christ by Stanley Hauerwas. This is my first time reading through it. And Bob, how many times have you read through it already?
This is maybe my fourth time to go through.
This week we find ourselves in the second week of Lent and focusing on the second phrase of Christ from the cross. This week's phrase is, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And so our conversation is both a reflection on that passage from Luke 23:43 and also on Hauerwas's words in this book. Bob, do you want to add anything as a way of introduction?
I would encourage people to read it. It's not a long book in terms of time to read, but you'll want to read it more than once. I think if you'll get in there and kind of hang with it, it will bring to you perhaps more questions than answers, but that's okay. That's part of the pilgrimage of being disciples. This God who's greater than we can exhaust in terms of knowledge in our lifetimes. But no, thank you. This is great.
Yeah, thanks. I can tell, we're only in the second chapter and I'm reading it as we go, and I can tell this is one I'll want to hold on to. It's both short but deep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
yeah,
it.
I could see 4 readings and it not being a snooze.
Yeah.
So my first question for us for today, he talks a lot about the need for significance, that the criminals ask Jesus to be remembered as they're dying, and that speaks to a human need for significance. So, Bob, do you feel the need to be significant, and do you think others do, and do you have thoughts on that need? I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, it is, and it's pretty basic psychology. I remember when I used to worked with college students and youth to go through all of that adolescent psychology and to hear about these, the basic needs that all human beings have, or at least two, and that was to belong and to matter. And so I think that's part of who we are. We were created to be a part of community. We were created to be known. I'm thinking about Parker Palmer's writings about to know and be known. He did reflections on educational pedagogy that was, how do we come at the spiritual formation piece so that we are known and we might be known, and how might we know God? So sure, I think that's in there. I've been reading a lot the last couple of weeks in particular about particularly men who are attracted to hate and groups that are anti-Semitic or hate groups, white supremacy groups. And there is one particular writer who survived being in one of those groups, and he was dealing drugs and doing his thing to be a part of the group. He knew who had bombed the Murrah building in Oklahoma City before it was announced. That he was in the middle of all this, and went to jail for a few years. And with the influence of a chaplain, found that a lot of his needs came from having basically been born and abandoned. And then his growing up was nowhere near anything worthwhile as far as thinking he was worthwhile. And so he was very attracted as an older teen to anyone who'd say you matter. It didn't matter who it was. And that really touched me, how the gift of grace that so many have. But even if healthy families, so to speak, we still want to belong and matter. We were made to be somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would think that's very true.
Yeah. As I was reading this, I was reminded I guess it comes from psychology, the idea of life review, and how as we approach death, whether it be from old age or severe illness, people often enter into a stage of life review where they're making sense of whether, as they tell their own stories, making sense and significance on their own of their life. And I got to see that firsthand the last few years with my grandfather, as he started going from this very tough person to this very tough military man to this very well, he mostly showed it to me and not as much to my brother, but he became this very like sweet, almost sentimental man. And so it made a lot more, like, it brought significance to his stories, and I think it helped remind him that he did lead a life worth living. And so I appreciate that the criminals on the crosses next to Jesus entered into this very human, normal stage, and that Jesus met that with compassion.
Yes, and even though we don't really have their whole backstory, it does seem that one of them, in particular, may have been looking for meaning in ways that were more internal.
Yeah.
Than.
So my next question is in the second phrase of Jesus is, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. And I just want us to discuss, what is paradise to you? Because I think that can mean a few different things for people.
Oh, absolutely. And we're only on our second conversation, but I've appreciated we have different contexts and environments, and in part to talk about maybe reflectively our lives, and that we all have places that we like to be. And I started to set up in the children's Sunday school room today because there's a little paradise in thinking about what it's like but when somebody else is taking care of you, and when you are a child and you don't know the struggles that are your parents or your whoever's taking care of you are going through. So that was sort of paradise. For me as a grown up, as I've tried to think through and live through this, and particularly from a pastoral perspective, what is paradise? I have come to the place in my life where I think that theologically, paradise is not so much place as it is the person of Christ. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear Jesus say, today you'll be with me, I'm thinking into, what does it mean to follow Christ? What does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to be a part of the all in all that Christ has come? It seems to me, when we read those passages about, you're in the world, but not of the world, which, and part of my growing up, that was to say, ignore the world. The world is evil. I thought, when I've learned, that was a terrible way to think through. It was a very Greek Hellenistic way to think through things, when God is very holistic. It's more, we don't belong just to this world or this family, but we are in the world as the kingdom mm-hmm. of God. And so we kind of live knowing this experience and this life with its suffering, its pain and its joys, and we are going towards, sort of, I like to think of paradise, and coming to understand paradise as the person of Christ, is this dawning experience that I hope happens to me over the whole length and breadth of my life.
I always think of when I first hear the word, the very first image that comes to me as my very first Bible was a Precious Moments Bible, and it had these really cute little Precious Moments drawings in it, and they had one towards the back in Revelation, and I'm honestly not sure if it was in Revelation, but it was of, like, everything was pearly gates and gold, and right. Then a little Precious Moments, little angel sitting there, and it was my first imagery and understanding of paradise or heaven were very of that image, but I appreciate that Hauerwas kind of pushed that to be, no, Jesus is promising that we will be with him, not necessarily what my little image holds.
Yeah, and doesn't that speak to beginning to be open to the poetry and the metaphors that God uses, that then can, for me, give me hope. If Christ is with me, it's not just, when I die by and by. But
Right.
it's this relationship of tabernacling, of growing into knowledge, which means I might be in the worst of circumstance. How often have we read the stories of people who have come out of the worst of circumstance, whether in war or whether some personal
Yeah.
violation? And you would never want anyone to have those experiences. And for some, they are damaging in ways it's hard to get over. But for so many, there's at least this. I'm not so sure about why this or how I feel like God, but I know there's something there, and there's something that's gotten me through. And
Yeah,
I think that's very important to say. And I think
it
that
is,
I think it's very important.
especially for our post-enlightenment or whatever phase we're really in
Right.
now,
That's right.
culture where we seek very quantitative answers, but so much of life is not able to quantify.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right. It's our life in the biblical world is about quality, not quantity.
yeah,
My old professors would have said that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to dwell in. Um,
yeah.
I can live there.
Well, that leads me to the next question of, can you share about your relationship with mystery?
Ah,
Because I think that feeds off of what we're talking about and what Hauerwas talks about in this chapter.
yeah. Well, yes. Stanley Hauer. I think well, I know one of the reasons I've read this book more than once is in his introduction. He gives the best definition of mystery that I've so far found. He talks about mystery as not something that you can't know, but
Mhm.
something in this case that is bigger than our lives that we have in our lives to ever comprehend. That you continue to grow and you realize, oh, this goes deeper. Oh, it's like if you could hold your breath forever and you swam to the bottom of the pool, but suddenly it yielded and there's another bottom to the pool, right? And you kept
Yeah.
going. And oh my! And his ideas are to say in accepting that there's mystery, in accepting there are unanswerable questions in this life. He says he's come to realize that perhaps living tolerant of mystery is the natural way we're supposed to live.
I think
It's
so.
what makes sense. Oh, we are people of mystery. Now, just from most of us have been educated as Western European, Northern European Westerners to see life as problems to be solved. And if I
Mhm.
can't solve the problem of my spouse, then I'll just get rid of them, in one way or the other. If I can't solve the problem of, I'll just cut it off, and the biblical witness has a lot more to do with dwelling and walking and
Yes.
taking the long road towards what are you doing with us? Not to say there aren't times you have to end relationships, right? But people are not just a problem to be solved. God is our paradise, and we have to learn to trust the mystery.
That's really good. And I think important words as we wrestle with living today. And the more I turn to scripture in hopes of a to-do list or a checklist
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
an ability to know all, I really appreciate mystery because it frees us. So good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope by way of closing, I just hope people are willing to read this book. I can't overemphasize how it's both tiny and worthwhile. So I hope you will join us on this journey.